It's the FilmFile, the film show for film geeks by film geeks, and this is episode 87.
Bum bum ba-da-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum
Hello and welcome to the film. I got that
to the
wrong.
theme tune.
To the theme tune.
Welcome to the theme tune.
Hello and welcome to the FilmFile, brought to you by the friendly neighborhood geeks, only known as myself, Lee Ford,
And me, Andy Meakin.
Okay, as you know, and I'll do something else a bit different this week. Still to come on the show, we are looking at last week's What If, reviews, and, of course, our deep dive, which is this week, the 1973 The Three Musketeers, directed by Richard Lester, starring Michael York, Oliver Reed, Richard Chamberlain, Frank Finlay, Christopher Lee, Raquel Welch, Simon Ward, Faye Dunaway, Charlton Heston, Jared E. Chaplin, Frank Finlay. What you ought to do is just bring the trailer up underneath me just going through through that list. I'll just give you some more if you want to just slowly fade it out. It might be quite funny. Spike Milligan, Sybil Danning, Roy Kinnear, Jean-Pierre Cassel, Richard Chamberlain, and then I'll let you just fade it through. That'd be quite amusing.
Such a cast.
Yeah. So come back after the trailer. The one thing you can say about the Three Musketeers, other than it's a lot of fun, is what a cast. So the film came out in 1973 and was already a proposed part 2. It was produced by the Salkins, who then went on using a similar method of shooting films back to back to make the Four Musketeers, to make Superman and Superman 2. This film, strangely enough, despite having a mega star cast, sticks very, very closely to the Alexander Dumas original story. But it does inject a fair amount of humor and fun into it. It's one of those films that is a staple of the holiday season. What I mean by that is Christmases, Easters, this film will turn up somewhere, usually followed by its sequel. And if you haven't seen it, it has that light, breezy, fun quality that Richard Lester embeds in all of his filmmaking. And it is an absolute treat. And one of those films that is a mirror to the period when the film was made. Andy, I know you have a lot of fun. Andy, I know you have a lot of love for this film.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is one of those films that as a really, really young lad, like you say, it used to pop up over holiday periods, and I used to look out for it coming round again so I could catch it again. And I loved the fun, I loved the japery, I loved the antics. But it's one of those films that as I grew older, I started to notice the social commentary and the politics balancing out the humour involved in it. And I became a fan. After watching this for the first time, I rented the Alexander Dumas book out from the library, and I immersed myself into it, and I absolutely loved it. And it's worth noting that out of all the adaptations of the Three Musketeers that there's been throughout the decades, this is strangely, despite the fact that it's quite farcical at times, one of the most faithful adaptations that there's been, albeit split into two parts. The sequel followed in 1974, but it doesn't make this first film on its own, any less of a film because it works so well as a solo adventure. It's the introduction of D'Artagnan to the Musketeers and proving himself to the Musketeers, whilst there's political intrigue and conspiracy going on behind the scenes that he gets embroiled in. You started mentioning the cast lineup, but you could talk for 14 hours about everyone who's listed in this film. This is the kind of cast that, you look at films like, we always refer to like Ocean's 11 is like, wow, all those names in one cast. But this did it so much earlier. Every one of the people in this are names that you recognize, and you love. For me, this was the film that introduced me to Michael York before Logan's Run. In fact, I only started watching Logan's Run because I recognized Michael York was in it, and I felt that I needed to watch it. And he's he's marvellously, charmingly excitable in the role of the ambitious D'Artagnan, ably supported by the greats of the time: Charlton Heston, Raquel Welch, Richard Chamberlain, Christopher Lee, just to name a handful. I mean, a cast like that is just, you die for a cast like that these days. I mean, we joke about Knives Out, and Knives Out 2 are using everyone in Hollywood. Yet they've still got a long way to go before they get as far as this. And that's not even throwing in Spike Milligan and Roy Kinnear in the comedy aspects to bring a bit of light levity. This is a fun film. This is a fun and kind of timeless film. Whenever we watched it recently, I've started to embrace some stuff that you might look at and go, well, that's a bit sloppily put together, like the sword fights. Can I just mention that what I love about the sword fights in this is that they were choreographed to look somewhat clumsy. Yeah. And I think that it's marvelous that that they've, rather than going for like perfect, like, haha, we shall parry and joust, ha ha ha. It's like clumsily tripping over and throwing things and stumbling, because it's how a fight would actually play out. And it makes it feel so much more believable. When we've been leading up to this one, we've been leading up to this as a deep dive, and I've just been waiting for the opportunity to sit and revisit it. And I said to you, I guarantee that as soon as I've watched this one, I feel that I need to watch the second one. And yes, I now want to watch the second one, because how it finishes just leaves you teased and waiting for the next film.
So a bit of background on this. As we said, Richard Lester, Dick Lester as he's known to his friends, became a big star by directing the two Beatles movie, especially Hard Day's Nights, which we should do a deep day. God, I can't speak today. Which we should do a deep dive over. I'll start again. Which we should do a deep dive on. So Lester became involved with the project when the producers briefly considered casting the Beatles as the Musketeers, and as Lester had directed those two with the group, they thought he would be the ideal guy. Anyway, as we know, the Beatles idea fell by the wayside, but Lester stayed on. And it would be his first film in 5 years. And though he was busy directing commercials, he was looking for finance on some other projects, including Flashman, written by George MacDonald Fraser, which he would get the chance to make later on. He brought George MacDonald Fraser onto the scripting side, who I believe wrote the humour into the Three Musketeers. God, why can't I speak? Who brought in the humour into the Three Musketeers and gelled wonderfully with Lester's eccentric storytelling style. The Salkinds wanted to make the film sexy and initially wanted Ursula Andress in the parts. Parts, of course, he did. And the Salkinds wanted to make the film sexy by bringing in people like Ursula Andress into the film. But pretty much left Lester to it. I'll just do that line again, that Ursula Andress and Leonard Whiting into the parts, but pretty much left Lester to it. And that's why you get notables like Spike Milligan and Roy Kinnear popping up, because he was such a big fan of those and a big fan of the Goons. The film doesn't go without controversy. And this is something that the Salkinds fell foul on with Superman. So the film was originally intended to be an epic movie with an intermission halfway through the film. But during the production, it was determined the film couldn't make its announced release date in that form. So the decision was made to split the longer film into two shorter features. So we got 1974's The Four Musketeers. Now, it is a seamless looking film because it was intended to be one film. And that left egg on the face with the producers, because a lot of the cast, right up to the point of the film being shown, incensed because they'd only signed on to do the one film. In fact, Charlton Heston apparently said at the dinner where the film was previewed and this information was previewed, two for the price of one. So the second feature results in lawsuits being filed to receive compensation for salaries associated with the sequel.
It's what's known as the Salkind clause.
That's right.
This led to it led to any time that something would be split into two parts, that the cast and crew were paid for their parts in both films, even if it was initially intended as a single feature. So films like Kill Bill, which was initially supposed to be a one-off film and got split in two, it resulted in two lots of payments, all because of this one film. Yeah, it was a huge movement, and we're seeing similar at this day and age. I mean, we're talking about like the Scarlett Johansson suing Disney, and that's another pivotal legal case that might end up with a Johansson clause at some point.
Yeah, and they did the same thing with Superman, but of course they got this clause in now. The intention of Superman was to shoot Superman and Superman 2 back to back.
Yeah,
And that was kind of their thing. Uh, seen as a seen as a money saving exercise to be able to shoot like that. And of course, we've had films since then, the Avengers, if you think about it,
yeah.
Avengers, uh, Endgame
Infinity War.
and Infinity War were shot back to back, as are the current Mission Impossible films. But despite all that, the film was a runaway success. And if you've not had a chance to see it, it is an absolutely whole bundle of fun. Its provocative version down to it doesn't send the film up, it doesn't send the story up, but it just adds to the adventure comedy. Don't you think? It's never a spoof of these kind of films, but
No,
it just adds an element and a layer of sometimes slapstick and uh, and comedy and comedic timing into the movie.
yeah, it uses levity to just like elevate it from being just like a political drama and conspiracy story into something entertaining for the whole family. Yeah, some of the humor is slightly dated. Has to be said that it is ribald and it does occasionally step close to the Carry On kind of humor, but I think it skirts around it nicely. I think it plays around it without becoming too crass. Uh, can we just mention the costume design?
Yes, of
Because the
course.
costumes in this film and the second film were absolutely evocative of the time that it's set in, because it's set in the time of the Anglo-French War, 1627 to 29. And so there was a lot of opportunity to have in like the grungy peasants roles with the burlap sack kind of cloth costumes looking dirty and grungy, but contrasted with like the cardinal's robes, which are never looks better on screen. Absolutely brilliant costume design from start to finish. And because D'Artagnan comes from poverty and works himself up to be within the royal circle, you see him work through all those aspects of costume until he's a flamboyant musketeer himself. I love the look of this film. I love the feel of this film and the sequel, The Four Musketeers, and even the Return of the Musketeers that followed a decade and a half later.
Yeah, the 20 years after film came out in 1989, loosely based on the 1845 novel by Dumas, 20 years after. I don't have much love for that at all. Not a great fan of the Return of the Musketeers. It feels forced. I feel that the cast are now slightly too old to be playing those roles, and I know it's addressed within the story, but it just doesn't work for me. Even though it's literally almost everybody who could returns to it, including Dick Lester. And of course, the sad part of that film is that Roy Kinnear lost his life in that film, which was a sad
Yeah.
loss to the industry and a great comedic actor. But no, I've got to be honest. The Return of the Musketeers just doesn't do it for me at all.
Yeah.
Are we kind of done on this?
I mean, there have been other adaptations of the Musketeers over the years, and I think it's my love of the original story that it's adapted from that still holds my interest in every adaptation. Even, well, I've got to mention my good friend Paul W.S. Anderson
I
and
was
his take
waiting
on
for
it,
you to bring that in.
which he brought a steampunk kind of aesthetic to it and did it in a rather different way. And I embraced that energy that he brought to it. I know it's not a great adaptation, but it was fun. And that's what I want from a Musketeers film. I want some fun. I want it to not take itself too seriously. But I don't think that any adaptation, even the Brat Pack 90s version with Keith Sutherland and Charlie Sheen, even that version doesn't stand anywhere close to the 1973 original. It's a film that came out when I was born. It came out the same year that I was born. It's been with me all my life, and it will be with me until the day I die.
I've got to agree. I'm just going to. I totally agree with you on the Brat Pack version, though I did like And I know I'm kind of one of the only people who did. I like the Musketeer 2001 Peter Hyams version, which
Mm.
was used the sort of the wire work from Sue Hark's regulars Zin Zin Zong for all the stunt choreography. But I do have a bit of a soft spot for it by comparison to those other films. But you're right. If you're thinking of a Musketeers film, then you've got to visit the Three Musketeers and subsequently the Four Musketeers.